Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue à l'atelier webinaire sur la conception et le contenu du site web. Alors, aujourd'hui, on va passer à travers différentes stratégies et différents concepts et détails qui vont servir utiles pendant votre conception et pendant la livraison de votre contenu du site web. Juste quelques petits points. Si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à utiliser le fonction Raise Hand, puis vous pouvez vous démuter après pour poser votre question. Alors, aujourd'hui, l'agenda. So we will basically go through very quickly the evaluation criteria. We will explain a bit how, the different types of websites, as well as the difference between a CMS, which is a content management system, a template, and a custom development so that you can choose which one is better suited for your team. We'll go through team communication as well as marketing strategies. And then we will show you what a good homepage should look like. We'll go through the menus, the division of content, and we will also talk about how the CRC servers work and how the submission will work this year and going forward. And then we'll finish with the overall tips and tricks, as well as explaining what, as well as presenting what the ideal timeline should look like in terms of your website being created. So if we start off with the evaluation criteria, and you've probably heard this from your mentor, from other CRC volunteers, as well as in other webinars, it's very, very important to check the evaluation forms both before and during the development of your website. We did change this particular evaluation form quite extensively this year. So it's not necessarily the same as prior years. So we do suggest and recommend very strongly that you actually review them and that you make sure that everything that you will do from now on will correspond to one of the criterion in the evaluation forms.
Par rapport aux différentes technologies que vous avez à votre disposition lorsque vient le temps de créer un site web, en fait, comme Natacha a dit, il y a les Content Management Systems. Souvent, les gens connaissent un peu plus ce genre de trucs-là comme étant WordPress ou Wix. Dans le fond, c'est que ça vous évite beaucoup de la partie codage. Tout ce que vous avez à faire, c'est souvent drag and drop, puis aller cocher des cases, changer des propriétés, mais ça évite beaucoup de troubles à comprendre comment faire la structure en HTML, comment bien ordonner en fait le CSS pour s'assurer que tout se place comme il faut sur la page avec les bonnes propriétés. J'ai laissé en fait des keywords, c'est que quand vous voulez faire des recherches, allez jamais écrire trop sur le long, sinon vous allez avoir de la misère. Mais mettons, vous voulez chercher comme là, l'exemple, c'était pour aller chercher des templates. Écrivez juste, mettons, free website template. Ou si vous voulez, mettons, nice website template, mettez des qualificatifs, des trucs comme ça, mais écrivez jamais genre des trucs super longs. Vous allez toujours tomber dans de l'information qui est complètement inutile. En programmation, en fait, puis c'est bon pour les sites web, pour le C++, peu importe. Les keywords, c'est un peu dans le fond ce qui fait que vous allez être bon ou mauvais à faire vos projets parce que c'est avec ça que vous allez trouver les meilleures ressources possibles. Ici, j'ai fait un petit chart, en fait, de juste des différentes technologies, dans le fond. CMS, comme j'ai expliqué, c'est le WordPress. Les templates, c'est quelque chose que vous allez aller, dans le fond, chercher en ligne. C'est un site web qui a déjà été fait, qui est en HTML, CSS. Donc, la majorité, toute la structure a été faite. Puis vous, tout ce que vous avez à faire, c'est aller peut-être changer des photos, rajouter du texte, peut-être faire quelques modifications mineures pour adapter la page à vos besoins ou les pages à vos besoins. Mais c'est la grosse différence par rapport au custom, c'est que le custom, vous devez tout faire de zéro. Les customs, c'est vraiment difficile souvent parce que c'est une chose faire un site web sur sa propre écran en soi, mais après, il faut s'assurer que ça fonctionne parce que c'est un des critères d'évaluation sur des mobiles, des iPads, des trucs comme ça. Donc, si vous voulez avoir le maximum de points possible, ça doit fonctionner sur plusieurs plateformes. Ça doit fonctionner sur Google Chrome autant que Safari ou Firefox. Donc, c'est euh, c'est une des choses qui est extrêmement difficile des custom builds, c'est que vous devez penser à beaucoup de choses, surtout quand c'est nos premiers sites web, ça peut être difficile des fois. Ça ne veut pas dire que c'est pas possible de le faire, c'est juste que ça va prendre beaucoup plus de temps et il va y avoir beaucoup plus d'apprentissage à faire. Donc ici, c'est ça par rapport aux difficultés. La modularité, par contre, c'est le gros avantage du custom par rapport, mettons, au content management. C'est que vous allez avoir beaucoup plus de facilité à faire des trucs vraiment personnalisés puis peut-être plus attrayants pour les juges puis les personnes qui vont venir regarder votre site web. Avec le Content Management System, c'est extrêmement difficile parce qu'il y a une structure qui est déjà un peu comme imposée. Donc, ça peut être difficile des fois de venir faire des trucs un petit peu plus flyés sur notre site web. Par rapport au coût, pas vraiment de différence. Je veux dire, c'est possible de toutes les avoir, en fait, de toutes les faire sans payer d'argent. Souvent, ceux que vous allez peut-être avoir à dépenser, mettons, c'est les Content Management System puis les templates si vous voulez avoir des trucs préfaits qui sont des fois un petit peu plus beaux que quelque chose que vous pourriez obtenir gratuitement. Mais sinon, je veux dire, c'est. Puis encore là, quand les gens doivent dépenser pour ces choses-là, c'est autour de comme 30 50 fait que ça peut être mis dans le budget de votre site web. Euh, Sinon, par rapport aux évaluations, en fait, puis là, on parle dans le meilleur des cas. Là. Dans le fond, on va dire que comme tout a été fait à la perfection dans les règles de l'art, c'est sûr que le custom build euh, va être évalué, puis va celui qui va être celui qui rapporte le plus de points parce que euh, ça a été tout fait par les gens par dans le fond, les personnes de l'équipe. Euh, ça va montrer en fait les prouesses techniques de l'équipe si c'est bien réussi, mais c'est là un peu le gros si, c'est que c'est extrêmement difficile de bien le réussir. Donc, par rapport à ça, moi, mon expérience personnelle, celui qui est le plus payant, c'est le template, parce que ça évite beaucoup de travail qui est en fait qui peut être redondant. Fait que faire la structure du site web, ça peut vraiment être long tout ça, mais je pense que c'est celui qui peut amener le plus gros gain avec le moins d'efforts, on va dire, parce qu'il peut amener quelque chose de vraiment intéressant puis on garde toute la modularité en fait du custom, puis on va chercher le côté de comme de ne pas avoir à faire la structure que le CMS peut nous présenter. Donc, c'est un peu ça pour les différents types de technologies. Ensuite, il y a les types de sites web qu'on peut retrouver, ben, qu'on retrouve en fait très souvent. Là. J'énonce ici comme le one-page versus le multi-page. Les deux ont leurs avantages, ils ont leurs inconvénients. C'est vraiment à la discrétion de l'équipe, de comment l'équipe veut market, à mon avis, son site web, puis comment l'équipe veut présenter en fait son information. Je pense que les deux peuvent être aussi gagnants l'un de l'autre tant qu'on est conscient des avantages puis des inconvénients. Euh, Dans le fond, c'est ça, j'ai mis deux exemples d'avantages puis de désavantages pour les deux types de sites web. Euh, on va commencer par les avantages. En fait, le site web sur une page, souvent, peut avoir un look and feel beaucoup plus moderne que celui à page multiple, dépendamment comment il a été, dans le fond, implémenté. Puis il permet des fois une meilleure continuité du contenu. En fait, ça va permettre souvent que comme on peut lire le contenu comme si c'était une histoire ou peu importe. Fait que, ça peut, dépendamment comment c'est market puis que c'est amené, on peut présenter à l'utilisateur tout en ordre les informations, puis ça peut vraiment flow de un concept à un autre. Le gros désavantage, quant à moi, de ce type de page-là, c'est que si il est mal optimisé, fait que vous mettez trop d'images, mettons, sur la page qui ne sont pas déjà, mettons, 16 au bon format. Fait que, mettons que vous présentez votre image, puis que c'est un 200 pixels par 300 pixels, mais que vous, dans vos données, vous mettez une image de, mettons, on va dire 600 par 400, le furteur doit la redimensionner au moment qu'il load la page. Puis ça va vraiment beaucoup ralentir si vous avez trop d'images parce que si vous avez un site web en une page, puis que, mettons, on va dire que sur votre site web, vous avez à peu près, mettons, vous avez toutes vos photos d'équipe qui sont mal dimensionnées, puis vous avez une équipe de comme 25 personnes, mais au moment de loader la page, toutes les images doivent être redimensionnées. Fait que ça peut extrêmement ralentir le site web. Ça peut amener un temps de load qui est vraiment désagréable pour l'utilisateur. Fait que quant à moi, c'est comme un des plus gros désavantages. L'autre affaire, c'est que ça peut être difficile peut-être à maintenir. Comme tout le code est sur une page souvent, il va être dans un fichier texte. Si c'est mal séparé, puis mal commenté, mal documenté, ça peut devenir extrêmement difficile euh, de, de faire des modifications puis de se retrouver dans ce genre de code-là. Les pages multiples, eux, leur avantage, c'est qu'ils permettent un contenu en fait vraiment bien divisé parce que vous allez avoir vous allez faire un switch de page dans le fond pour chaque onglet, si on veut, ou chaque concept de votre site web. Et il est beaucoup plus facile de travailler en équipe. Comme vous n'êtes pas vraiment peut-être à l'aise avec les systèmes qui gèrent les modifications de code et tout ça. C'est beaucoup plus facile parce que vous pouvez tout séparer. Mettons, toutes vos pages vont être dans des fichiers HTML différents. Fait qu'une personne peut travailler sur un fichier, puis une autre personne peut travailler sur un autre fichier. Donc, c'est beaucoup plus facile de cette façon-là, peut-être, de travailler en équipe à construire le site web. Euh, c'est le gros avantage, quant à moi, de ce genre de site web-là. Par contre, des fois, ça peut être facile de perdre l'uniformité. Comme vous allez différentes personnes à travailler sur votre site web, c'est facile qu'une personne préfère son style d'une certaine façon, puis qu'une autre le fasse d'une façon complètement différente. Puis là, au moment, mettons, de l'évaluation, les juges vont probablement ressentir peut-être dans ce genre de situation-là un peu un clash dans le site web parce que il, il va avoir des trucs vraiment différents dans le fond, sur deux pages différentes. C'est aussi un genre de site web qui peut entraîner beaucoup de clics si il est mal conçu. Donc, c'est des choses à garder en tête quand on fait ces types de sites web-là.
So in terms of team communication, we just want to basically make sure and again strongly suggest that there is a very strong team communication when it comes to the website. So yes, it's two separate components, but it's still one website. So the content people need to speak with the design people, and the design people need to speak with the content people. So you can't create design without knowing what content you're going to be putting in there, and you can't create content without knowing where it's going to go, at least in a general sense, on your website. So just keep in mind that when it does come to team communication, even though you're working on content, you do need to include the design people in your discussions and vice versa. So now we'll go through a couple of marketing strategies over the next few slides, and it's basically just for your benefit, really. It will basically show you all of the different strategies that you can implement within your team and within your website. So this year we took, as you've probably seen from the rulebook and from the evaluation forms, a more marketing approach to the website component. So instead of having it really based only on the game and kind of what you've done for the robot, we went a bit further than that, a bit further than your team. And we want you guys to basically market the CRC experience, right? What does the CRC experience mean to your school, to your team? And what have you done throughout the entire season for all of the components, right? We're not going to only focus on robot. We're going to focus on all of the different components of the competition. So the first thing, and it's one of the really first things that you're going to do when you're creating a website, is to set your mission and goals. So basically what I've done here is I've tried, or I've given you guys a formula that you can try to create your mission and goal out of. So basically the format is we, with fill in the blank of what you do, for, and then fill in the blank of who you do it for, to, and the goal you want to achieve. So it could be similar to we compete in a competition for our school to learn and apply concepts that we've learned in class. That's very, very basic, honestly. And it's something that you guys can definitely come up with a more definitive goal and a more specific goal for you guys. But that's basically the concept. If you have that formula, that is something that you will refer to when you're creating your website, both on the design and the content front. The second thing is to know your audience. This is super, super important because sometimes when we're creating a website, we tend to have what we kind of call tunnel vision, in the sense that we're only going to post what we know or what we want to share. But it's not necessarily the case when you have a website where students, parents, teachers, sponsors, and eventually even the judges will see, right? So that's something that you do need to keep in mind. It's something that will play a big role in how you design your website and also what content goes in there, right? So if someone, you know, off the side of the road goes and visits your website, are they going to be able to understand what's there, right? Are they going to be able to understand what the CRC robotics competition is, what your robot does, what your pitch is for the season? So that's just something that you need to keep in mind when you're putting all of that content on your website. The third item is to identify and allocate resources. So I know that some teams have a very dedicated team for the website, and other teams have a more general robotics team where everybody does everything. Both can work, and it's really to the discretion of the school. So all that we're trying to share here is really to have a dedicated team. And that doesn't necessarily mean to have a website team, but more have resources dedicated to doing the website, so that you're not kind of scrambling at the last minute to find who can do this and who can do that. So have really dedicated people that will do that, and nominate or vote on or designate a team captain that will be responsible to basically make sure everything gets done on time. Then you have your theme. And as we've always said, the theme is optional, but most teams end up picking a theme. So if you do end up picking a theme, just make sure that that theme follows through all of your components. So even on your website and through all of the pages of your website, make sure that your theme kind of follows through and that people can really resonate and identify with that theme. The fifth strategy is related to social media. So you can link social media accounts to your website. A lot of companies do it, a lot of businesses do it, and a lot of teams already do it. Our only suggestion is to link a social media account only if you're going to maintain it. So don't link a social media account that, let's say, doesn't have any posts on it or any photos on it. That's kind of empty because you just started it. Maybe wait until you've posted a few things and then link it to your website. And also, don't link the social media account if your last post is, let's say, a year ago. Kind of try to ramp it up and do a few more recent posts, and then you can link it. Just from a perspective, just from the perspective of a viewer and your audience, it doesn't necessarily look very good if you link a social media account that doesn't look very active, that doesn't look very maintained. So the next strategy is a pretty big one. It's called content audit. So basically, this is used in a lot of big companies, and it's really used when you want to redo your whole website in a more professional environment. In your case, it's really you're building a new website from year to year. So you can kind of think of it as redoing a website, because that's kind of what you're doing every year. So what the content audit is, it's basically just a log. It's a trail of all of your content, where it goes, who wrote it, the status of it, is it completed, is it published, etc. So it may look like a lot of work, and I won't lie, it's probably a lot of work to get started. But once you're in the in the mix of everything, and once you're rolling with it, it's very, very easy to maintain if you kind of have the habit of going back to it and making those changes. So basically, it's a copy deck, what's called a copy deck. It logs all of your content. It can be done in Word or Excel. So this one was done in Excel. I prefer personally Excel, just because the columns are easier to manage. You can do tables, etc. So it's probably a lot easier in Excel. And basically what you would do is you include a row for every section or every piece of content that you're going to put. And you include information about that piece of content, like the page that it's on, the sub page that it's on, and we'll go through menus and division of content a bit later on in this webinar. The actual section of that sub page or that page, the specific English content and the French content. And if there's any dependencies, if you've maybe linked to that in another page, or maybe you're talking about a particular item or a particular concept that was described higher up, you might want to put those dependencies in there. The author is very important. So it's who wrote that content. And the reason it's important is so that you can actually go back to that person, maybe if you have questions, or maybe to clarify a few things when you're putting the content on the website. It's always better to have the author, the person who created the content, so that you're not asking everybody on your team exactly who wrote it and if they can make changes and what something means. The status is also very important. It will tell you where the content's at. So here I've put kind of content complete, not published. So what you can do here is have just a drop-down list of different statuses that you would want in your content log. So you can have not started, in progress, in translation, content complete, not published, content complete, published, etc. And then once you've published it, you would put the published date and also the link. And this will also help be an easy reference when maybe you're going back in this content log and you're like, I don't really like the word individually. Let me remove it. So you actually have the link directly there. You'll click on the link and you'll make the change on your website once you've made it in your content log. So yes, it may seem like double the work because you're making changes on this log as well as on your website. But it's a lot easier to manage all of the content that's on your website if you have it all written down beforehand. So just something to keep in mind. And we can also help you create your copy deck if you ever want to start one and you're not exactly sure, or if you kind of take a stab at it and you're not exactly sure that you've done it correctly, you can always send it to us and we can validate that for you and give you some feedback on it. And then the last item, which will stem from your content calendar a bit, your content audit, is your content calendar. So this is basically, it's kind of self-explanatory. It's a calendar of when all of your content will be due. So it makes sure the whole team is aligned on when the content is due. There are multiple different applications and ways that you can do this. You can use what's called a Kanban board. So it looks like this one here, where you have, a to-do list, a list of what you have to do today or maybe this week, what's in progress and what's been done. And these are all customizable. All of your columns are customizable. You can edit each of these, or you can add more if you want more. Maybe you have one that's in translation or in validation or whatnot. There's a lot of different applications that do this. You can use Trello. You can use Monday.com, you can use Asana, you can use Jira. They all come at different costs, but they all the end of the day do the same thing, especially when it comes to just content calendar. You need really the base model. So it shouldn't be very expensive if you kind of go with any of those items, any of those applications. The other option is to have a calendar. And again, there are different types of calendars. I wouldn't suggest using like a Google Calendar or something like that. I would suggest really using a content calendar. And if you Google website content calendar, then you'll definitely find a bunch of applications and you'll be able to use it. Personally, if I had to choose, I would go with what we call the Kanban board. So the Trello or Asana or Monday.com or whatnot above the calendar, but I will leave it up to you guys to make your choice within each team. So when you're creating a website, we suggest that you actually answer 6 different questions. It's the 5 W's and the 1 H. So it's why, what, who, where, when, and how. So why are you embarking on this project? For most of you guys, it's going to be the same why. It's because of the CRC robotics competition or because we're participating in this competition. The what will be very specific. So what is the message that you want to send in your website? And that goes back to your mission and goals. So you'll just have to kind of come up with a 1-sentence brief explanation of what you want to send as a message. Who is the audience? So again, we went through that. You need to identify your target audience, and there's many different audiences that you'll have. You won't necessarily have one target because you'll have many different types of people looking at your website, but they all have something in common. They're all in one way or another interested in what you have to say. They're all in one way or another interested in the competition or robotics in general or your school. So that is your target audience, even though they may be very diverse in age or in what they do, right? You can have teachers, you can have students, you can have judges, but they are all your target audience. Where? So where will the message be read? Again, if you go back to the evaluation criteria, there is kind of a requirement that your website be accessible and work well on all types of devices. That means desktop, tablet, phone. So just keep that in mind when you're designing and putting content on your website. And make sure that you also keep in mind that people can technically view your website from anywhere in the world, right? So you may want to put in somewhere that you're Canadian or whatnot. So that's just some kind of feedback or suggestions that we can give to you. When? So the timing of the process to create and publish the content, that's where your content audit and your content calendar definitely come into play. And the how. So how should you present the structure? How should you present and structure the content? So that goes back to the design. But again, your design can't work without your content. So just make sure that as a team, you are all aligned on how you want to present this, how your website should look, where you're going to put the content, where you're going to put the pictures, how people are going to navigate, etc. So elements of a good website, there are quite a few, and this is very, very high level. So first of all, you have your information architecture. And again, it kind of goes back to the content audit, but your information architecture basically tells you where everything is, what link is where, leads to what content or what page, what subpages stem from what major pages, etc. Your visual design, so that's also very important. Visual design, is it appealing to the user? Is it visually appealing? Does it look nice? Your functionality, so your functionality is, can people actually navigate through your website? Are they able to click on stuff? Are they able to view videos? Are they able to navigate through your menus? Are they able to scroll down to the bottom of the page? Is stuff being cut off, etc. Usability. So again, that's a bit similar to functionality, but usability is how can I basically use that website? How can I access it? How can I actually use it to my benefit? Can I find information there quickly and easily? Typography. So that's really all about font and background. So red font, or sorry, red background, yellow font, probably not the best mix. So just make sure that you kind of choose the best background and the best font size and font color, as well as the actual font, right? So pick something that is legible. Don't pick kind of calligraphy font. It's very nice, but it doesn't read very well on a website. So just keep that in mind. The user interface, so that's basically what you're looking at, right? The interface that it's on. We went through the CMS and the template and the custom development. So you can kind of choose from there. Obviously, like we said, the custom development, you can build it exactly how you want it, but there are advantages to the CMS and the template that can make it so that it's a good experience for whoever's viewing your website, but it's not too complicated for you guys to actually set up. Your content strategy. So again, that goes back to the content log, all of the strategy around marketing the experience, marketing your team, marketing your school, marketing the competition in and of itself, and kind of the strategy of where that information is being placed on your website. And then lastly is your interaction. So how are people actually interacting with the design? Can they view videos? Can they do something? Like, is there a game or something that they can do when they're on their website? So there's a lot of different things. Obviously, you don't have to do all of these 8 things, but if you do most of them well, then you're definitely on your way to a very good website for the purposes of the competition. In terms of your homepage, so your homepage attracts your audience. So it's the landing page. Once they hit your website, that's what they see. So it really needs to reel them in, needs to attract them, and it needs to give them enough information for them to actually be interested in what you have to share, but not too much information so that they don't actually explore the rest of your website. So if you put everything on your homepage that you want someone to know, then that's all they're going to see. They're just going to go on your homepage, they're going to read that homepage, and they're never going to go on any other page. But if you give them enough information to reel them in and kind of have links towards other pages of your website, that makes them explore more and want to know more. So here I gave an example, completely not robotics related, but this is an example of a pretty good homepage. So there's a nice background. It kind of identifies what the company is or what it does. And then there's that kind of main phrase or theme or description of what they do. So listen to your favorite MIDI files on BitMIDI. So obviously to someone who's maybe Googled, how do I listen to my MIDI files? This will probably come up and they will get reeled in because it's an attractive homepage. It tells them exactly what they do. And because the user actually wants to do that, they'll be able to kind of move forward and explore the rest of the homepage, and explore the rest of the website as well. So I'll turn it over to Alex now for the rest.
Donc, pour ce qui est en fait de la division de votre contenu une fois sur le site web, c'est quand même quelque chose de très important. Puis c'est quelque chose qu'en lisant en fait souvent les critères d'évaluation, vous allez être capable de déterminer comment le diviser. Peut-être un peu moins maintenant vu qu'on a enlevé certaines choses, mais c'est quand même encore très faisable de trouver comment diviser le site web de façon intelligente et concise en regardant un peu les critères d'évaluation et avec un peu notre intuition. C'est très important pour la présentation, autant du contenu que pour l'esthétique du site web, parce que ça va beaucoup aider votre public, en fait, à bien comprendre c'est quoi que vous essayez de leur présenter, c'est quoi les trucs importants, en fait, de votre site web, parce que ça va être, dans le fond, vous allez le diviser selon qu'est-ce qui est important et ce que vous voulez mettre de l'avant. Il Il y a plusieurs. Ben, en fait, je vous présente deux façons de le faire. Il y a la classique top bar que vous pouvez voir souvent en haut des pages. C'est la deuxième image, ouais, c'est ça que dans le fond, vous voyez très souvent, les sujets sont en onglet. Je vous suggère des fois, si l'utilité y est, de mettre des sous-onglets, que dans le fond, quand vous cliquez, ça vous ajoute des options. Des fois, ça peut être intéressant pour éviter aux personnes de chercher de façon trop exhaustive, en fait, dans votre site web. Sinon, il y a la sidebar qui est peut-être un petit peu moins commune parce qu'on la voit plus souvent dans des applications web, mais qui peut être quand même intéressante des fois de la façon que vous allez réussir à l'intégrer. C'est le genre de barre que des fois on peut faire comme rétractable. Fait que comme là, elle sera à sa pleine grandeur, puis quand elle sera petite, on voit juste les icônes. Fait que des fois, ça peut être intéressant pour pour mettre un peu de style ou pour montrer certains aspects. Euh, puis cacher des trucs des fois qu'on ne veut pas présenter. Gardez ça quand même simple, mettez jamais trop d'onglets. Trop, c'est comme pas assez. Si vous avez juste trop de divisions, à un moment donné, ça surcharge votre navbar, puis c'est juste plus une barre de navigation parce que le monde ne savent plus comment s'orienter. Il y a juste trop d'options, puis ça devient complètement inutile. Donc, gardez ça à 4, peut-être 5 maximum, gros maximum onglets dans le fond, comme mettons menu. Puis après ça, des fois, si vous voulez, vous pouvez mettre des subdivisions dedans, mais allez généralement pas plus que ça, sinon, vient qu'à un moment donné, c'est surchargé. Sinon, ben, allez, moi, comme je vais toujours suggérer ça, en fait, c'est comme la programmation, aller en ligne pour voir qu'est-ce qui a déjà été fait, puis essayer de vous inspirer de ce que les autres personnes ont déjà créé. Puis, mais n'oubliez pas qu'en fait, si vous utilisez du code puis qu'il n'y a pas vraiment de modification qui est faite par vous, vous devez mettre les copyrights dessus pour au moins donner la propriété intellectuelle à la personne qui l'a fait. Donc, c'est ça. Sinon,
Je vais
ouais,
juste, j'ai une main levée. Mia, as-tu une question? You have a question? Je pense pas que le micro fonctionne. On va revenir à la question. Continue, Alex.
Excuse me, hello, do you guys hear me?
Yes.
okay.
Oh, perfect.
Yes.
On the interaction of my website, if I don't mention to the viewers that they should click on something for something else to happen, would that be a problem, or should we mention it like on the bottom, like click me or like hover over?
It's gonna depend. If it's obvious that there is something to click, you don't need to specify the user to go click on a link or whatever it is. But in my opinion, if you have to tell the user to go click on something, it's because you're lacking like the friend. I don't know.
User friendly.
Yeah, user friendly. Yeah,
Not
user friendly. Yeah, c'est ça.
So just in general, sorry to steal Alex's thunder here. If you're wondering if people would click that link or how they would navigate your website, the easiest way is to put your website in front of someone that's never seen it before, and it'll open your eyes to people how they'll navigate it, and it's not the same way that you will.
Yeah, it's the best way to know if it's user friendly or not. Present it to like maybe 2 people, 3, and if they don't see that there is something to click, it's because it's not obvious enough. So,
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Donc, OK. Les serveurs et la soumission du site web. Dans le fond, sur Manager, vous avez accès à votre portail Vesta. Comme on peut voir sur l'image en bas, vous avez le nom de la plateforme, fait que Vesta, votre nom d'utilisateur et votre mot de passe. Puis au bout, vous avez un bouton, en fait, avec le petit truc bleu, là. Quand vous allez cliquer là-dessus, ça va vous diriger sur la page où vous devez rentrer votre utilisateur puis vos mots de passe. Ça va vous rediriger sur, dans le fond, la plateforme qui est utilisée pour mettre le site web sur le serveur, puis en fait interagir avec votre espace serveur sur le serveur de la CRC. Il va y avoir des tutoriels qui vont venir avant la mi-janvier sur comment l'utiliser, puis des trucs comme ça. On va essayer en fait que ça soit pour le début janvier, mais ça va dépendre de d'autres tutoriels qui doivent sortir, puis du temps que ça va prendre à les faire. Dans le fond, ça va être surtout un tutoriel sur le transfert de fichiers avec FileZilla, parce que c'est principalement le, le, le tutoriel qui, à mon avis, va être le plus pertinent pour savoir comment faire avec cette plateforme-là. Sinon, pour les soumissions, c'est sur Manager aussi. C'est comme l'année passée, vous avez un onglet pour aller mettre, dans le fond, déposer votre URL. Et vous avez juste besoin de faire comme l'année passée, vous déposez votre URL, puis c'est toujours la dernière soumission qui va être prise en compte lors de l'évaluation du site web.
So we're close to the end of the webinar. So we're going to go through a couple of tips and tricks that we think will be able to help you in the design and content of your website. So the first thing, and we've mentioned it in this webinar, is just to be aware and beware of copyright laws. So just make sure that if you are taking something that already exists and you're using it, just make sure to credit the original creator of that. The second one is not to use too many buzzwords. So it seems counterintuitive sometimes, and sometimes you would think that you should use buzzwords on a website. So the thing is that when you have an audience who's looking at a website, they need to be able to identify and figure out what it means to them, right? So if you're saying, the process is easy, we'll let the user and the audience decide if it's easy or not. You can definitely use some buzzwords. Obviously, it is a marketing tactic, so you can definitely use them. Just make sure that you don't use too many and that not every second sentence has one of those buzzwords in them. The third is to get your team documentation on a weekly basis. So one of the criteria in the evaluation form is to have a kind of student experience documentation. So just to kind of show the progress throughout the entire season. If you wait until when you have to put content on your website or when you have to design your content, then it's probably too late and you may not have a lot of documentation to show. So with this in mind, just make sure maybe weekly, even bi-weekly if you guys don't meet that often, but for sure on a very regular basis, make sure to take photos of all of the progress, right? The robot, the pitch, the video, etc. Take videos of people working. You can even do interviews with other students or mentors to kind of get that documentation. It doesn't mean that at the end of it, everything's going to be used, but at least you have it. More is definitely better in this case because you'll have a more variety to choose from, I guess, once you're building your website. The fourth tip is to actually create your entire website in one language, and then once it's final, create it in the other language. So a lot of people go page by page or section by section, and they create one in English and then one in French. The thing is that once you go to make changes, let's say you're on page 3 of your website and you're like, oh, that content that was on the homepage should kind of go here. Then you have to go move it, and you have to move it in both languages. So just make sure you can create your website in whatever language you prefer as the first option. And then once it's final, you've reviewed it, you've kind of all signed off on it, you're happy with it, then you can create it in the other language. And even though there might be a few touch-ups to do and tweaks to do once it's made in both languages, it won't be as much as doing really section by section in both languages as a first as a first wave. So the next one would be to really have a plan and stick to it. So do all of your research before you start creating your website. We've kind of proposed that you Google a couple of things before you start, do that all before you even head into designing and content. Because the thing is that if you keep changing your plan and changing how you're going to do things, then you're just going to end up being very, very late in the deadlines that you should set for yourself. And it's just going to make you rush at the end and potentially submit something that doesn't necessarily do well or isn't up to par as to what you would have liked. The next tip is to finish your website 2 weeks before the deadline. So it may seem like a lot, especially because the season in and of itself is quite condensed, but finishing the website 2 weeks before the deadline will actually allow you to test everything. You can test the content, the translation, the alignment, the font size, the font color, the design. You can test it on different devices. So having that 2 weeks to do it will definitely put you at ease. And then, yes, you can do tweaks during those 2 weeks, obviously, if you find any kind of bugs or anything like that. But trying to test your website the day before it's due or on the same day as submission, you'll likely miss a few things and a few bugs that could have been fixed if you had tested earlier. The other tip is, as we kind of mentioned as well, to have other students or friends or family outside of the CRC team at your school review your website. So again, maybe something that you've built, it's like, oh yeah, I have to click here, or oh yeah, this makes sense. But to someone completely outside of the CRC, it may not make sense at all. So that will also give you kind of perspective as to what you should change. And again, having your website done 2 weeks before will give you time to have people test it and do any tweaks that you think are efficient and are effective changes. And the last tip and trick is to work to make sure you submit something. So you guys can reference the team management video webinar that we posted earlier this season that goes through kind of what you should focus on in the competition and how rankings work and scoring. But basically just keep in mind that the website is 2 components. So if you don't submit a website, you're automatically ranked at the lowest ranking for 2 components and not just one. So just keep that in mind when maybe you've decided to focus efforts elsewhere or something like that. Submitting something is definitely better than submitting nothing. And then just to close off the webinar, we've created an ideal timeline that we would suggest you would follow for the website. Again, it's obviously dependent on each schools, but this is how we would kind of see the creation of a website within the CRC season. So if we consider the submission date as T, first of all, we'll work backwards from there. So your submission date, we suggest again that you start your submission early. The submission deadline is at 11:59 p.m. Don't start your uploading and your submission at 11:58 because you will likely not make it in time. So start as early as possible. As Alex mentioned, you can do as many submissions before the deadline as you wish. So if your website is ready, and again, if it was ready 2 weeks before and all you have to do is a couple of tweaks, by the morning of the submission date, you should be done. So you can submit in the morning, and let's say, I don't know, someone's on your website and they see a typo or they see a font that's different or something like that. You can fix it very easily and then just resubmit it. Basically what happens is at the deadline, we'll take the last submission. So you can keep submitting as you wish throughout the day, and we'll just take your last submission after, once the deadline is closed. So if we go 2 weeks before that submission deadline, like we said, your website should be completed in both languages. And now you're going to do all of your testing and review by the team, your friends, your family for the next 2 weeks until your submission. Then if we go 2 weeks before that, your website should be completed in your preferred language, and you would begin kind of creating the website in the other language. So here you would have 2 weeks to basically create the website in the second language. Your website would be completed in the first language that you chose. And then if we go 4 weeks before that, so you will have 4 weeks between these two different items. So 4 weeks before that, your content is completed in both languages. You would have your French and your English content completed, at least in terms of the final. And again, it could be tweaked as you kind of start mounting your website, but at least the gist of it is there and you have exactly what you want to communicate. And you would begin mounting your website in the preferred language. So you would have 4 weeks to mount your website in your preferred language. The reason that we would suggest 4 weeks here and then 2 weeks here is just because your first time, I guess, doing your website, you'll kind of have a lot more tweaks to do, a lot more discussions to be had because you're not exactly sure if something should go on another page instead of this page. So there's a lot more discussions that need to be had and a lot more analysis, I guess, that you would want to do, maybe a lot more talks and kind of tweaking and moving stuff around just to see how it looks. But once it's done in that one language, it shouldn't be very long to create it in that second language, especially if your content is complete. So that's why you have 4 weeks for your first language and 2 weeks for the second language. So if we go 1 week before you would start mounting your website in your preferred language, you would be kind of doing all the final touches on the content and you would be translating the content. So again, similar to how your website should be done all in one language and then in a second language once it's final. It's the same thing for the content. Write all of your content in one language and then translate everything. And then if we go 2 weeks before that, you would have your content log, structure, and calendar complete, and you would begin creating content in your preferred language. So you would have 2 weeks to create your content in your preferred language, and then 1 week for the translation. And then if we go 2 weeks before that, so that's really kind of the start of the season, right? You would have a team discussion on the theme, your content strategies, the design, the look and feel of your website. And you would also designate your team captain. Your roles and responsibilities would be assigned to each designated team member and dedicated team member for your website team. So that would be the whole season. So again, if you have your team built maybe at the end of the school year or even at the beginning of the school year, you can already start discussing this. Even if the evaluation criteria changes, or even if certain rules are added to the rulebook, which is obviously only shared at kickoff, you'll still be ahead of the game if you've at least had some discussions on your theme and content strategies. Your content strategies shouldn't be super affected by the different rules and by the actual game itself, right? So you can already start on other components, you can start on just discussion, and you'll already be ahead of the game if you do that. So just something to keep in mind, but that would be basically the ideal timeline that we would suggest you follow for the website. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. Again, don't forget to always verify manager frequently. We post different news of the competition, any changes. And we also post the links to all of these webinar workshops. And you can follow us on social media. We post a bunch of stuff there as well. And you can use the forum to ask any questions on manager. That will be public. And if you have very specific questions that you may not necessarily want to share with the rest of the schools, you can definitely email us at info.crc@sciencetech.ca, and we'll be more than happy to respond or even set up a call if that's needed. So that